Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest meeting of the White Allies Network, where we are focusing once more on hidden racism, the kind of racism that doesn't always hit the news. And tonight, I'm delighted that we are focusing on the East and Southeast Asian experience. And for some reason, unknown even to myself, I've stuck an N on the end of that in the publicity, so apologies for that. Um, Irene pointed that out this evening, which was fairly helpful. But it's great that we have Irene with us to share from her experiences and some of her understanding of this issue. She's one of our Council of Reference members, and it's always a delight and a privilege when one of our members, Council of Reference members, can share. And so, thank you, Irene, for being willing to share on this subject this evening. Just to give you an idea of the agenda for this evening, by the way, my name is Adrian Locke. I'm the network coordinator for the White Allies Network, so that's me. Our agenda, just a note about the recording. We are recording this evening's session. At the same time, if there's anything that you may say or during the evening or anyone says, which they prefer not to be on the recording, I'm also in charge of the editing, so I can always edit that out. During group discussions, your faces on the recording will be blurred out, so we won't, nobody will see your faces on the recording, just to reassure you on that. So in a minute, I'm going to remind everyone of our purpose as a network, talk about race and racism in the news, which we do every time since we last met, that is. Just a reminder about the qualities of our spaces that we are trying to create in order to create safe enough spaces for people to be able to share and talk freely. And then it's over to Irene for our headline act, as it were. And we won't have breakout groups today, but we will have a whole group discussion on the issues that Irene raises. And she's got a rich and varied presentation for us with some video clips, as well as some just from her own experience. We'll be learning much tonight, I'm sure, from all of those. Then at the end, talk about what's next for our final session of 2024 in October. And then do stick around after 9:30. We'll turn off the recording then, and Irene will be available to answer any questions or get any feedback from the session that you'd like to share. And it's been great that so many people have been able to hang around for a little bit after 9:30 p.m. So on with the agenda then. So a reminder of our purpose as a network. We aim to help become true allies of people of colour in the fight against racial justice, to learn about ourselves as white people, our histories, privileges and impact, to learn about people of colour, their histories, their experiences and their perspectives. But really importantly, to develop ideas for action that we can take individually, collectively, and in partnership with others towards racial justice. It's not just a talking shop or an intellectual discussion, but we really want to be empowered to take action so that we can actually become true allies against racism in our contexts. And just to emphasize, everyone is welcome at our meetings. We call ourselves White Allies Network, and because it's about us taking responsibility as white people for addressing the issues that our ancestors have often been involved in initiating and perpetrating. And unless we are active, I would suggest we are colluding with. So we want to be active and take responsibility, but we also really welcome people of colour to be co-mentors with us. If you feel able to join us and journey with us, then we really do welcome your presence here. So race and racism in the news, my goodness, how much there has been since we last met, even just in those last couple of weeks. So I'm just picking a few things. We have celebrated in the past the fact that the first ministers of our nations here in the UK have not been white people. But unfortunately, Hamza Yusuf has had to resign as Scotland's first minister. And then just more recently, there's been a vote of no confidence on Vaughan Gething, the Welsh first minister. And I just wonder whether there's a degree of racism in some of the pressure they've both been put under. Yeah, so it's just kind of one of those things. You could say it's not that, it's all political, and yet, I wonder. As we're on politics, Diane Abbott was at last readmitted to the Labour Party after this race row probe, and eventually decided to stand as a Labour candidate in this coming election next week. At the same time, Faiza Shaheen was deselected as a candidate. And I don't know if anyone has read much about Faiza, but she seemed to be an excellent local candidate for her constituency, and that seems such a shame. She is now standing as an independent candidate for her constituency. So be interesting to see how she gets on there. Other BBC News headlines, in fact, it's not just BBC, across the piece really. We learned that Stephen Lawrence detectives will not face charges. So that saga continues, and the Lawrence's fight for justice, unfortunately, drags on. And we heard this horrible story, didn't we, about Greek coast guards throwing migrants overboard to their deaths not that long ago. That awful way that migrants are being treated by many European governments, or at least people working for those governments. And our very own Robert Beckford, one of our own council of reference, by us reporting last time the fairly large funds that the Anglican Church has committed to pay as reparations, he was quite critical in saying he's not sure that they can come clean about the debt over slavery. One of the things he criticised was the fact that a black woman from the United Reformed Church delivered an apology on behalf of her church to the Jamaican government. And he criticised that. At the same time, she actually replied in a letter to The Guardian, arguing why she was the right person to deliver that apology. So that was Reverend Dr. Tessa Henry Robinson. And it'd be good if you read the first Roberts article, do read her response to that to get that kind of sense of two sides of the argument there. We also hear that apparently, according to the Independent, that Labour tried to gag Martin Ford, the black lawyer who wrote the party's own racism report. So I don't think any political party is kind of, I don't know, I don't think any of them represent my views of racism. There are probably many on this call as well. So more trouble there. And then, I don't know about you, but I sometimes recognize unconscious bias when I'm surprised by something I see. And this report came up today on my news feed about what Vox magazine called Black Girl Tanning, saying it's the summer's most radical beauty trend. Tanning is having a moment, and black women are finally a part of it. So that was one of those things that made me sit up and notice and examine my own unconscious bias about never really considering that would be something that black women might be interested in and be involved in. So those are just a few of the things. No doubt you've got others you could add, because it's been such a busy period of race and racism in the news since we last met. So just before I hand over to Irene for our main topic of this evening, I just want to reiterate very briefly the qualities of our spaces. And we do ask everyone who is in our meetings to sign up to these qualities. Oh yes, Jackie's just put in, and Sunak, I feel there's racism in the overly hard time he is getting. Yeah, it may well be the case as well. Thanks for that, Jackie. Just noticed that. Yeah, we commit to be respectful and non-judgmental, being slow to make negative judgments about each other, being aware of the intersectionality of experiences too, that it's more complex than just the race issue. That's complex enough in itself, but people are often impacted by prejudice and discrimination for a variety of reasons. We aim to be humble and curious, allowed to own our own ignorance, able to say sorry authentically when we unintentionally offend, but also being curious about views very different to our own, pausing before responding if we feel triggered. And these are potentially triggering issues that we're talking about in our meetings. So do just be aware of your own internal response around that, and look after yourself within that as well. Being mindful and heartful, careful, thinking before we speak, considerate in our contributions and language, emotional and empathetic, not rationalizing away each other's feelings, but able to express our own as well. And finally, open and authentic, personal, able to speak our own truths and sharing our own experiences and perspectives. Courageous, open to challenge and to be challenged, courage to confront ourselves and others, but also confidential, so that what is shared is kept confidential to the context in which it is shared. And then finally, kind and other-centered, sensitive to each other's needs, building relationships first. Some people need more time and space than others before they're willing to share, but also not wallowing in white guilt, recognizing that becoming an anti-racist is not about me, but it's about defending my ego, but it's about serving a greater cause. So if you have any problems with those spaces, they are important to us. Any of those qualities, rather, they are important to us. And so do let us know. And but also it may not be the best evening for you, place for you to be this evening if you have serious problem with any of those, because that's the kind of space that we genuinely try and create here. All right. I rattled through that a little bit, but I hope that makes sense. So let's move on to our core topic of this evening with Irene. I'll just introduce you to how Irene's going to tackle the topic before I hand over to her. So first of all, we're going to she's going to look at a history of East and Southeast Asian people in the UK. We are conscious there may be people joining us from outside of the UK, so we are sharing this from a UK perspective at the moment. But we do welcome your thoughts and comments later on if you are from outside of the UK, and if you can just share anything about what you know of the situation of East and Southeast Asian heritage people in your country as well. And then something about the awareness of East and Southeast Asian communities to people in the UK. How aware have we been, particularly as white people, about their presence and their contribution? And thirdly, what does racism look like and feel like to those from East and Southeast Asian heritage? And Irene carried out an interview with quite a famous actor, which she's going to kind of share from, as well as sharing from her own experience there. We'll also look at the recent history of people from East and Southeast Asian heritage. Has the experience changed in recent years? And then finally, a bit of light relief, courtesy of British-born Chinese comedians. We got a few short video clips there. Serious message, but done with humor and in a way which can sometimes just disarm us, but really help challenge our stereotypes and our prejudices ourselves. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to stop talking now because this is Irene's story. So Irene, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thanks for inviting me to do this. First of all, there's so much material and there's far too much to kind of cover. I really struggle to think what's going to be helpful in this context to bring to people, whilst not just it being about facts and figures, but making it personal as well. That said, I will start with a few facts and figures. And I am getting some reference here from Wikipedia. So if it sounds familiar, then you'll know why. And I'm just going to highlight a few things, but then I do encourage you, actually, I've read the whole thing. So I do encourage you to actually garner some information from there in your own time. So in terms of history, when did the first Chinese person set foot in the UK? Well, it was way, way back in 1657, a chap called Chen Fu-song. And he came to the attention of King James II, so was actually welcomed into court. And he found favour such that the king his portrait painted, and thereafter has this portrait hung in his bedroom. So I like to think about, was he the first Chinese pin-up in a royal's bedchamber? So something to think about maybe. And since then, throughout the whole of the 19th century, there's generally been an uninterrupted flow of Chinese immigrants into the UK. I don't know if you're aware of that, if that's something that's passed you by. I certainly don't recall hearing that on the news, certainly not when I was growing up. So we are the Chinese community is the third largest community of colour in the UK, although after the Black community and the South Asian community, we somehow kind of get lost. And that's, I would say it's influenced by the kind of geo-socio-political situation, because of what's going on in the news and what's also happening generally around the world. But yes, I should reference those images. So yeah, so we've got a picture of Chen Fu-song as painted in King James's court, and then also just to, as I said, from the in the 19th century. So although this picture of the lady in Limehouse, it's in the 1920s. So Limehouse obviously would have been the first area that was populated not only by the Chinese community, but actually all immigrants in all places, because it was an access and a waterway for trade. And it was also the place that had the cheapest rents. So that's what immigrants could afford. So actually, it was a very multicultural area, and each community just lived alongside each other and got on with trying to make their way in London. And then you may or may not have heard of Anna May Wong. She's an American-born Chinese actress, and she became prolific, but was only ever really allowed to play stereotyped or Chinese roles, which, to her frustration, motivated her to actually move to Europe to actually develop more of a film career. And it's only in this century, so in recent years, I would say that she's finally been recognized. She's been given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and I know that a biopic is in the making of her life. And she was American born, so just because of her color and how she looked, she was experiencing racism right from the get-go. Racism in this country tends not to get much focus or highlighted. I find that I will report things or mention things just for the sake of being part of the stats, so I think it's important. After Limehouse, there was a graduation to Chinese people establishing themselves in the West End, in Gerrard Street, and you'll see this picture of Gerrard Street in the 70s. So this is before it was pedestrianised, and I actually remember being able to, with my parents, being able to drive up Gerrard Street, parking on a double yellow, my dad keeping the engine running so that my mom could go and call into one of the supermarkets and get the guy to wheel out this huge bag of rice, which probably was as big as me. And my dad would quickly rush out, open the boot, get the rice in, and then, drive away. But since then, for those of you who know London, you'll see that it's pedestrianised and it's become a real focal point for tourists, but also, a place where the Chinese community can gather. I feel, it is a sense of being there amongst my own people when I'm there. I should say that I was born and raised here in white middle class suburbia, which namely to begin with was Bexley. And then at the age of 8, my parents moved to the also equally white middle class suburbia of Pettswood in Orpington and Bromley. So I've experienced being the only person of colour at school in younger years, and then being part of the very, very, very minority in secondary school. But we'll go on to that later. The other image that you see is, it was a long fought over battle by relatives of the Chinese men that had served in Liverpool. And I'm glad the plaque is there, but I was shocked to see that it's only gone up in 2006, because the contribution that all these Chinese men made was seen as not important enough, which I think is very sad.
The plaque that's there, could you just give a bit of background? I'm not sure people will be able to read the writing on there, but just what it refers to in terms of the moments in history that it refers to.
Yeah, I'll read it. It says, "To the Chinese merchant seamen who served this country well during both world wars, for those who gave their lives for their country, thank you. So the many Chinese merchant seamen who after both world wars were required to leave, for their wives and partners who were left in ignorance of what happened to their men, for the children who never knew their fathers." This is a small reminder of what took place. We hope nothing like this will ever happen again. And for those who don't know what that's about, men from mainland China came over to help with the war effort. And because, they were seen as inferior, they were allowed to, work on the ships and bring food, etc. But they were certainly parts of the war effort. They weren't allowed, obviously, to handle guns or do anything that was, on the front line in terms of that had any sense of responsibility. But they were very much part of the war effort, and the job they did and the part they played enabled the other parts of soldiers, etc., and military to to do the job they had to do. And whilst being over here, they They started relationships and they had children, and some were married. And in the middle of the night in 1946, the government had decided in secret that they were going to authorize some action to basically get rid of these Chinese men. So they basically disappeared them in the middle of the night. And they also had authorities just push their way into the family homes, demand from their wives and partners that they give them any paperwork that belonged to these Chinese men, so that basically they could get rid of all evidence and that they were there. And they weren't told what was happening. They were put on a boat and sailed out to a ship, which then took them off. It stopped in a couple of countries. I believe one of them was Cuba, but also in Hong Kong and then in China. So completely apart from any one of those stops. And some of them never saw their families again. And what makes me really angry is just the legacy of damage and destruction that's left on these families, even to today.
Irene, my apologies. You were going to talk about this later, weren't you? I've just
Yeah, I
realised.
feel like I suddenly
I could have brought
yeah.
that forward for you. So my apologies. So we'll
That's all right.
when we touch on it a bit later. So you
Yeah.
told the story, but you can perhaps expand on it later.
That's all right. Should I go to videos?
Yeah,
Or...
now.
Okay, so this video, this series, they're kind of little vox pops. They're very short, and they were made, actually, I can't believe, 20 years ago by friends and colleagues of mine. You'll see one of them here, Paul Courtney Hugh, and another chap from Chan, and you might notice and recognise some other faces. So this got broadcast on Channel 4 in over 4 nights in the run-up to Chinese New Year. So it's like 5 minutes before the news or something like that. Anyway, we'll talk about it afterwards, so have a look and a listen.
At this point of the evening, we stopped to watch The Missing Chink Episode 1, a video which lasts 3 minutes 7 seconds. That is available on YouTube. We are unable to include it in this recording because of copyright reasons, but you can find it at the address at YouTube you can find on your screen.
Okay, thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that. I have to say, at the time, it got mixed responses from both the Chinese and the non-Chinese community. Oh, I should add that the person doing the interviewing was someone who was white. So anyway, so yes. Yeah, and if you do get a chance, because they are available on YouTube, please do feel free to look at the others. There's, like I said, there's 4 in total. Yeah, so I've known David for many, many years, and David Yip, who's an actor, writer, director, etc. And he's probably our most well-known, in terms of longevity, actor that's known in this country. And anyway, so I had a chat with him the other day, and he couldn't be with us today. So I'm going to just talk about some of the things that he shared with me. So I'm sorry it's not his voice you're hearing. So I posed some questions to him. I asked him, what was your first memory of being made to feel different? When were you first aware that you were Chinese? Well, he said, when I went to secondary school in 1962, we lived in the centre of Liverpool, around the corner from Chinatown. The Docklands were a very multicultural area, with the black community situated near the Chinese community. So, having passed my 11 plus, I got on a bus for the first time to go to secondary school, 5 miles away. I was one of 3 boys of colour, one also being Chinese and the other one black. At the time, it was the blacks who got more racist abuse. I noticed that there was more overt racism between blacks and whites. They tended to leave us alone. So I spent a couple of years working in the arts in Liverpool when I left school, and predominantly, of course, I was working with white people. And then, having got the place at drama school, I left Liverpool and went to London to go to the East 15 drama school. London was amazing. It had everything. It was mind-blowing. I was 20 years old and I was going off to train as an actor. Despite the makeup of students at drama school being white, there were Americans and a few non-whites like me. I think I remember 2 other black students. I asked him, at drama school, were you given the impression from teaching staff that there would be a career waiting for you? David responded, and he tells a story saying that one of the tutors said, well, you're very Chinese and you've got a very strong Liverpool accent. And they were right. And the suggestion was not to be losing my accent, but to consider taking on and learning how to speak in the neutral, or RP, as received pronunciation, as we call it. He actually was very smart and chose to do that. And that was to his benefit, because after he came out of drama school, he came across other actors who had regional accents and they were struggling to get parts. He suggested to them maybe it's because they had such thick accents, because in those days, you know, things were a lot more closed, less tolerant. And back then there was his foundation was in the theatre. That's where he got a lot of training, but that's also at drama school. At the time they only trained you for theatre, they didn't really train you for screen work. So he had a great 7 years actually doing theatre at the Young Vic, which has always been very pioneering, actually, I have to say, in his work. And he was able to play, you know, all sorts of parts, classical roles, which weren't stereotyped. So he wasn't playing those roles because of his race. He was playing them in spite of, which proved to be a very valuable experience. So then I asked him, how did The Chinese Detective come about? Well, his agent had sent him for an interview at the BBC. He hadn't been given any information. It was just they wanted to put on a new detective series. That's it. So he just thought, you know, he was quite relaxed about it. He was the first on the list. He was round the corner in Shepherd's Bush, and he just went along to the BBC and got seen straight away. And he thought, oh, it's fine. They're just going to ask me, you know, questions about the Chinese. You know, I don't have to, like, it'll be one of the usual things. And then when he started to read some of the pages, he realized he was reading for the part of the Chinese detective, John Ho, the lead. So in the moment, he was able to gather himself and got on very well in that casting, and subsequently, as we know, got offered the role. One thing he remembers the director being very sure about was that this detective was going to be a detective. So where the audience, on seeing his face, might assume once he gets in a corner that he's going to pull out all his kung fu and to get himself out of it, they had decided that wasn't going to happen. It was just through being smart, it was through being a detective, it was just from being who he was, that's how he was going to carry out his job. And it ended up being a huge success for the BBC. They had huge kudos from making and broadcasting The Chinese Detective. And it was seen as one of those breakthrough shows, and how it kind of smashed, you know, stereotypes. Because up to that point, David reminded me that the only thing being broadcast was actually an imported show, Charlie Chan from the States. In fact, he wasn't Chinese at all. It was played by a white actor in yellow face, so pretending to be Chinese and doing all the stereotypical tropes and, you know, characteristics with that. So so The Chinese Detective was very successful, but it only ran for 2 series because it wasn't seen as, and then it was taken off because it wasn't seen as sexy enough. So, which is a shame. And I noticed that one thing that is notable is there's never been a new series updated, and they've never shown the repeats. They've never shown repeats. How many people see repeats of shows they know and love that are from decades and decades and decades ago? This is the one series that has never been shown on repeat. Why? That's what I ask. But David also makes the point, which I agree with, which is that, you know, the Chinese community, he says his generation and generation before, they haven't been that forthcoming, or they haven't been, you know, that encouraging or enthused about, you know, being involved in the arts. But, you know, that's getting better now, and I can testify to that from my own experience with a creative background, that there are more writers, directors, producers, etc., and artists involved in the, you know, in the creative industries. So that can only, we hope, increase representation, but that's not without the struggle of the gatekeepers and the people within the industry who still see it as their job to provide ratings and get bums on seats, as it were, which means they're more likely to minimize risk and put on something which will be seen as successful and you are worthy. From my point of view, I'd say, well, why don't you trust your audience and treat them actually like the intelligent people that they are, rather than assume that they can't handle it if they see something that isn't usual. But I personally would argue with that, because if you walk into any hospital or if you work into any area of society now, you will see every community, and I do highlight hospitals actually, just because there's two programs which I think you probably guess, which will remain unnamed, who I find rather irritating because they are not representative of the UK hospital. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Before we move on to me, I asked David about his influence when he was on Brookside, and he insisted that he actually was able to develop things and have a say in terms of what the writers were doing in developing characters. So when he was first sent scripts, he only agreed after 6 months to do it. And when he was initially sent scripts, things just weren't accurate. And at first the writers really kind of pushed against it, but I'm happy to say, and he was happy to say that, you know, by the end of it, they actually really valued his input. So that was very positive. Okay, yeah, we can move on to me. Yeah, that's me, age 13. And that was me on my birthday this year, this January. So I know, haven't changed a bit. Yep, so I was born and raised here to Chinese parents. And so I went through the school system, and in primary and infants and primary, my older sister, 2 academic years above, and myself, we were the only kids of any colour in the infants and junior school. Interesting. And then at secondary school, after we'd moved, I was part of the 0.1%, less than 1% of all colours at a girls' school of around 800. So feeling different, being made to feel different, being othered was just how it was. There was never the sense of you're part of us, one of us, acceptance. Acceptance was always a shifting ground. I'm going to read out, because I think it's easier, I'm going to read out some things I initially shared with Adrian a couple of years ago when we first met, because they're my real life experience, and otherwise I'm in danger of rambling and getting lost. So this is just some of my personal experience. It's not exhaustive and in no particular order as such, but it's lived experience through my entire life from the moment that I can remember. You have to appreciate that my home upbringing was Chinese, and yet once I left the front door, my education exposure was Western. So as a child, under 5 years old, before I went to sleep, I remember, according to the fairy stories I'd read, the white fairy stories, I would make my 3 wishes. I wished that I would wake up blonde, blue-eyed, and English, meaning white. I've always felt othered, made to feel different, separate. I don't fit in, I stick out like a sore thumb, the odd one out, I don't belong. Every morning I wake up as me, but as soon as I leave my home, I have to deal with the racialized assumption and projection from others, whatever color they may be. The gender bias is in favor of boys. I experienced this whenever my parents socialized with Chinese people. Also as a teenager, as well, as my parents took us to a Chinese church in London. I'm the younger of 2 girls in my family, so I learned that I had 0 status in life. I was not only a girl, I was also a second daughter. So really low status. No one, not really important or to be bothered with. This is the attitude that was projected overtly and covertly. And I also saw this happening to the other girls around me. I noticed people being uncomfortable around me, therefore making me feel uncomfortable when I hadn't fulfilled their expectations of what a Chinese girl, a good Chinese girl or woman was in their mind, about having a voice and visibility and not being ignored. The Chinese community are the 3rd largest community of colour in the UK, yet continue to be treated like the poor cousin of colour in issues across the board, next to their neighbours of the Black and South Asian community. In all areas of UK life, focus has generally been on the Black and Asian community, and that the race issue is a Black and Asian issue, when you think about the terms that were coined, BME, Black and minority ethnic, it says it in and of itself. And then to BAME, Black, Asian and minority ethnic. So I'm still waiting for when I get a look in, when it changes from BME to BAME to whatever. Or maybe we just don't need to have that label. This, of course, is perpetuated in the media. Here's an example of verbal abuse and microaggressions that I've experienced. You have a chip on your shoulder. You don't have to make everything so political. Oh, don't be so sensitive. You lot are okay. It's Black people or Asian people who experience racism. You don't get that. You're all right because you're all good at maths and science, so you'll always get a job. Pretty girl, Chinese girl like you shouldn't have a problem getting a job, whatever, access to things. You can all do kung fu, can't you? Like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. You don't want to go and cause trouble or make a noise or a fuss. Be a good girl. Do your parents own a takeaway in a restaurant? You're not really Chinese though, are you? I mean, you were born here, you were raised here. You're not really Chinese. I can't tell you apart, you lot. You all look the same. Do you only date Chinese guys? Where'd you come from? No. Where'd you really come from? No. Where'd you come from? Why have you got an English name? Why don't you have a Chinese name? Oh, I better not mess with you. You probably know Kung Fu. Can you cook Chinese? Do you only eat Chinese food at home? Do you know how to use a spoon, knife and fork? Oh, I bet you know how to do your country's like traditional dance as well. I've always really liked Chinese girls. I bet they're like, yeah, in bed, yeah? Do you like sex? Oh, you're giving me your inscrutable face. You're a bit mouthy for a Chinese woman, aren't you? Why don't you go back to where you came from? Go back to your own country. Did you eat monkey brains and dog growing up? Do you have to talk Chinese when you get home? Oh, hey, you should do one of those kung fu movies, Crouching Tiger, that flying daggers thing. In terms of personal assault, there was always verbal, but one significant event happened when I was 8 years old at school, where I was strangled, pinned up against a post by another girl. And I remember watching people walk by as if in slow-mo, and no one came to stop or intervene. And you could say, yeah, because they were all 8 years old as well, but no one ran for a teacher either. And the very next day, I had to sit next to the same girl again, and she was still picking on me. For at least 2 years at secondary school, because of the layout of the classroom and the tables, because obviously they'd been rearranged the night before, there wasn't a chair for me. So I'd always come in and I'd just have to loiter somehow or hope that someone would take pity on me and let me share the chair. I've been pushed, I've been shoved, I've been hit, I've been thumped, I've been spat at. I've been followed, I've been harassed, I've been threatened, I've been cornered, I've been pinned against a wall, I've been restrained. I've had half-eaten food thrown at me while being verbally abused, being told that's what people where I come from, that's how they behave, so I should be fine with it. I just want to point out one area which we see in the media how my community is often scapegoated as well. One of the examples, I mean, there are many, but one of the examples, for example, foot and mouth disease, that situation that happened. And there was a time when people were boycotting Chinatown, just saying, the food was unclean and they were trying to feed people like, poisoned food. And it was one of the times actually the community did come out on the street and, demonstrate about it. And, insisted that the press actually stop writing that kind of thing, which wasn't based on any fact. It was horrible. And then, of course, everyone will be familiar with the really recent pandemic of COVID, where the spotlight really got put on anyone of Chinese or East Asian and heritage. I remember as we drew near to the lockdown, overhearing people talking about, there's people in China, and in China they're dirty, and that's what they do. People like that, that's what people like that do. That's what those people over there do. And I noticed walking around, this is just on in central London, and people kind of doing a double take when they saw me walking by. And, you know, I wanted to kind of shout out, I haven't been to the mainland for over 10 years. I haven't left the country. I'm not contagious. I don't have anything that you can catch. You know, and I felt that I had to basically make myself small and not appear to be any kind of a threat by just being there, walking around. I know there were news reports and the increase of racial abuse and assaults in this country tripled. So there's certainly a load of stats now. And then one to do with Chinese merchant seamen that I mentioned before. That may seem like a historical situation, but in fact, now that records are unsealed in the National Archive, the children and grandchildren of those men can now access records they previously didn't have, didn't have access to, and can actually call out that act that disappeared their fathers and grandfathers. I was privileged to be at a meeting last summer in London, and some of the children and grandchildren came down from Liverpool. There's a number of women, and they shared their stories, painful stories of the legacy and effect of having mothers who have felt they've been abandoned. They had no answer, they couldn't explain it, from being these biracial, mixed race kids in a white area, and how the local community responded to them generally negatively, and how they've had lifetime issues with a sense of identity, not being accepted, feeling like they're not accepted in either community. The picture we see, I met this lady, she was at this talk, and she's a daughter, and her own daughter came as well. So now, only because the records are released, they are petitioning against the government for an apology. They want it acknowledged about what was done to their fathers and grandfathers, and they want an apology. They don't need compensation, even though obviously that's helpful, but they want it acknowledged about what the then Labour government did and how they decimated their family lives then, and as I say, through to today. It's affected their physical health, mental health, and all areas of their lives. That's an entire, section of a community that no one has held their hands up to take responsibility for. Okay, I think it's time for a little bit of light relief. So I'm going to introduce to you comedians Phil Wang and Ken Cheng. Thank you, Adrian.
At this point, we watch these two short videos of Phil Wang and Ken Cheng in action. We can't include those recordings in this recording because of copyright reasons, but you can see the YouTube addresses on the screen. Our conversation continues after watching these videos.
So if you haven't heard of Phil Wang or Ken Cheng, now you have. And I would wholeheartedly encourage you to check them out on YouTube. They're also appearing, you can also access more material by them on BBC iPlayer in Live at the Apollo, and also BBC Sounds. And there's a great program that Phil Wang does called Wangsplaining, which is very funny, which really just explores the subject a whole lot more, and kind of you'll hear echoes of what I've shared either from me or from David, but I've done it with in a humorous way, but nevertheless getting the point across. So please do check them out. And I'm no good with maths or numbers. So have I got time to add just 2 footnotes? Well, 1 footnote, and then Adrian, is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah. So 1 footnote which I forgot to include was growing up. It wasn't until, I can't remember if it was into my teens or even into my 20s, but I remember it being national news when they announced that you could now report, it was now possible to report verbal racial abuse to the police. Up to that point, it only had been physical. So basically, it felt like people could yell at me and say all sorts of things that they wanted, and I had no comeback. I had nothing, no ammunition. And then finally, when I remember seeing the news and just thinking, wow, I actually have something now. Yeah, because until that point, it just made me feel like I'm gagged, I'm handcuffed, and I'm stuck in a corner, and I can't do anything. I just have to take it. So I'm happy to say that I have actually made use of that law, and it has been, and it was handled well by on the occasions when I spoke to the police. One thing I'd like to, it's going to be a list of resources which I know Adrian's about to, or is keen to, or about to list. And please do take a look at, it's not an exhaustive list, but you'll find out more information. And one of the things I'd like to encourage everyone, draw attention for everyone to get involved, and this is one thing that you can do. It's called the Active Bystander course, and it's free, and it's in person or it's online. I know the next couple of ones are online, so no excuse. Yeah, it's where you can learn, you as an ally, should you choose, can learn how to be an active bystander when you witness or come across racism towards anyone who's Chinese or East Asian. So it's just a great learning. I've done it myself. I did it in person, and I learned a lot because it enabled and supported me in, where I do stand. And yeah, tools, just more tools. But I think if you're serious about wanting to be an ally and support anyone of color, but in this case, my community, because I feel like we're the least supportive, then please do sign up to this free course, which is being run with the BC group, and all details, I believe, are on the list. Do you want me to go into the next part, Adrian, or?
So I think just an open discussion now, isn't it? So do you want to kind of kick that off with?
Yeah, I'd be really interested. I know it's a lot of material, and like I said, it's not exhaustive, and you've only heard from me really, with obviously some contribution from David and the clips that you've seen. But I might add, the first one you saw in the takeaway, the title of that series is called The Missing Chink. It was broadcast on Channel 4, and it was written by the taller one of those guys. They're both called Paul, actually, and he's a friend and a colleague. Now, there was a big backlash from both, well, there was some backlash from both the Chinese and non-Chinese communities about the title. But, talking with Paul, and it was 20 years ago now, which wow, can't believe. What people don't realize is it had to be a title with such assault to catch any kind of attention. Because let's face it, if you just had a program about, Chinese New Year or Chinese people, I mean, you'd probably just switch off or wouldn't bother, because why would it interest you? Because this community is not interesting, or this community doesn't feature. Why bother? So to have a provocative title, I don't have a problem with, because I know where he was coming from. The other thing people don't realize is, you try writing something, pitching it, getting in front of a broadcaster and getting it made. So there's a lot more layers to having had that series made than just what you see. So so overall, I think I'd be really interested to know, and I'd like to know just if you could share just your reactions to just a real honest, immediate action to anything you've heard or seen. Of course, you're going to take this away. You're going to kind of absorb it and think about it and chew on it, hopefully. And, more thoughts or things will settle, and hopefully you'll get engaged with the Active Bystander course as well. And you'll read up some more things and you'll access the resources. But right here, right now, I would be, because I'm trying to think if I've ever been given the opportunity to do this before outside the context of my own community. I've spoken enough times in within my own community, but I'm preaching to the converted. So I'd be really interested to know. I'm a little bit scared, but Adrian's here. So dare I say, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts and reactions are to anything you've heard. It doesn't about me. Go.
Sure. Can I just first of all, just at this stage, thank you for what you've covered this evening. I'm aware it's costly to talk about your own experiences when you have been on the receiving end of racism all of your life, and so I really do respect you and thank you for just daring to do that for our benefit this evening. So don't take that for granted at all. So thank you from me. But let's open it up. Do unmute if you would, and just share your own thoughts and responses to what Irene's covered for us this evening. Well, Alison, yeah.
I'm very glad to have that bystander link. I'll follow that up because as the reactions go, I'm just really sad and disappointed that Irene's had the experience she's had. At the time, you know, I mean, racism was supposed to be a thing of the past. But so I've been, obviously, as I always am on these sessions, informed about how life is for people who don't happen to be same color as me. And as I say, I think that bystander link will be very helpful.
Thanks, Alison. Angela?
First of all, I'd like to echo what Adrian said. Irene, I feel that your courage is extraordinary, and I thank you for telling us of these horrendous experiences, which I have been in ignorance of, and I wish I hadn't been, but I have been, and now I know that I will look at and behave towards any British Chinese person differently. I hope I haven't been racist. I think what I've done is ignore, which is terrible. But your courage and your horrible experiences, and I'm sure you haven't told us the half of it, but I certainly have understood, really has opened my eyes. I'm only sorry that they've clearly been closed before, but thank you.
Shirley?
Irene, I want to thank you. I want to thank you as a brown girl. I want to thank you for the stories you've shared. And one of the reasons I, in particular, have come today is that we all have massive gaps in our knowledge, massive gaps, irrespective of what color we are. And I came to one of these sessions where I think there was a piece around the Opium Wars, and I kind of thought, you know what? And you spoke at that, or we were in the same group. And I was thinking there's a massive gap in my knowledge around this. And then there's a massive gap around other countries, such as what's happened in Congo and King Leopold and all of this stuff. So I have put myself on a learning journey of knowing more and doing more. One of the things I feel as someone who does a lot of work around anti-racism, that's not my specialist area, but that's a focus area, is that if I use the white term of ethnic minorities or minority ethnic, etc., is that within all of this, certain groups get minoritized and invisibilized. And if I just speak to the invisibilization aspect of it, I do feel large communities, and especially East and Southeast Asian communities, are more invisibilized, you know, because people don't recognize the level of microaggressions that take place, because often what happens, I think, is the color of our skin shows up differently if you're a brown or black person. And then a whole load of rubbish is then assumed as if, well, it can't really affect you. But it's not, it's the impact of being made invisible that leads to that, not the reality of lived experience. Yeah. So thank you for bringing your voice forth, and thank you for helping me continue my learning.
Thanks, Shirley. Olivia.
Yes, I just want to echo everything that everyone says earlier. I think I want to thank you, Irene, for sharing this experience. As a Black person, I have to admit that I'm not, I'm not aware of some of the things that you shared. And that's not because I cannot educate myself and learn, but as someone just shared, this issue has been made so invisible that you don't even think of learning about that. And yeah, it's make me think that, if I put myself in the shoes of some people, and I want to extend this issue to every race, you could easily ignore the plight of people by just being a little bit intellectually and emotionally lazy, by not looking at what is not really discussed in the mainstream media and stuff like that. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it was time well used to come to this forum just to learn. And yeah, that's really great. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Irene. And I feel dreadfully sorry that, having lived in this country, you've had such an appalling experience growing up here. We have a very lamentable, I think, history of neglect of recognizing the immense contribution that men from East Asia made to the British war effort in the First World War and in the Second World War, and without which our country wouldn't have survived, frankly. And it went completely unrecognized. I was shocked to hear that actually that not only was it not recognized, but those who did, give their energy, and many who lost their lives, but who decided to settle here, were suddenly deported without any notice and torn away from families and relationships that they'd built up here. And I think we have a dreadful history of doing that. And those who died on the ships and in the various theatres of war where they served either as labourers or combatants, whatever it was, their families were never informed. They just didn't appear on any published casualty list, and nobody went to see their families and said that their loved one had been killed or had perished in some way. And so we do have a great debt, and it's still not recognised very much. I think we see that plaque in Liverpool, but there is so much more, I think, that we haven't really taken any account of. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, it was the story of the merchant seaman that kind of struck me the most. Really, the fact that the contrast between the contribution they made to the war effort, you would have thought that would have kind of changed attitudes in some shape or form, and to a much more inclusive and honouring attitude. But the opposite happened. Just you wouldn't treat any person or any animal in that such a way, would you? Well, so you wouldn't. It's shocking to think that anyone or anything, could be treated in that way. It's just inhumane to the extreme.
And I think the thing that I found so troubling when meeting these ladies last year, like I said, the children and grandchildren, is they're living in trauma now, today. It hasn't gone away. It hasn't gone away. What was done to them as a result of this act being put through? And in the act, it actually says, you know, the removal of undesirable Chinese. Well, they actually use the word undesirable.
Yeah.
Well, they weren't undesirable when they were kind of feeding you and doing this and shifting stuff and all the rest of it, but now they're undesirable. I mean, who even comes up with that? The government at the time. But it's meeting these women and their lives are just broken. You know, hearing stories about, oh, my mother was just, she plunged into a depression. She could never work. She had spent a lifetime on meds. You know, and things like, you know, where's my dad? Did he ever love me? Did he ever care about me? Why did he leave me? That's what the children go through. You know, so it's so damaging, and they live in the consequence of that decision that's made today. So, and they couldn't even begin to take action about it until, you know, records were released because of the 50-year kind of, you know, to keep them, they had to remain undisclosed. Yeah.
And then it's a no-win for those children as well, isn't it? Because, you know, if they're told the truth, then they've got to deal with the anger they feel justifiably towards the country that they live in.
Yeah. Yeah. But
It's
the other thing, I just responding, it's interesting to hear what people say. It's, I suppose for me, to hear people say how shocked you are that all this happened, I guess for me, it just became part of normal life. It was just, at home, I'm just me. As soon as I go outside, I'm othered, and I literally cannot do anything about that. So I think I just was always braced and, you know, kind of got used to and anticipated. So it was never a surprise when something happened. So I can't, that assumption is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to not have that.
yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah, and I've been through, I mean, I've been a victim of crime on a number of occasions, and one it went through to, you know, went through the whole court system because they caught someone, and he had no remorse whatsoever, no remorse whatsoever. You know, and interesting in the court system in this country, because everything is focused on a perpetrator, you know, and my statement wasn't about, so I didn't get a chance to speak, and it was cobbled together in such a bad way, it didn't represent me at all, because when I gave the statement I was in such a state, and, you know, the I can't remember if it was a WPC or a PC who wrote it down, yeah, anyway, it just didn't represent me very well, but I was just behind a screen, I couldn't say anything, and this person would not look me in the eye, and at the end of it, yeah, he was convicted, but afterwards when I spoke to the voters representing me, I said, you know, I had felt so, I felt like my hands were tied, because all I did was to sit behind a, you know, glass screen. I was, there wasn't any point that I was in a position where I could actually speak for myself or express anything. And the only thing that I felt really validated me was actually having my impact statement read out. But as a victim, you're completely left out of the courts and conclusions, I guess. You know, and I think, and also, and in addition, and that will be obviously for any victim, you know, but in addition to having, you know, been always invisible and unrecognized, it just compounds it, quite frankly. Yeah, I wanted to say, I would encourage you all, if you are in the London area, it's started now, and it'll be on the list of information that you know, that Adrian has as well on the slides, is there's a show on at the Soho Theatre. It's running into July, which has been written and directed and performed by a friend and colleague of mine, Daniel York Lowe. And it touches very much upon, I'm not sure about the style, yeah, I don't know too much about that because I think kind of there's punk rock elements, but it's he goes into a lot of the British Chinese experience. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Irene. Just one last comment from Olivier before we turn. I just draw things officially to a close.
Sure.
We turn the recording off, and then we have some time together if anyone wants to stay after that. Olivier.
Thank you, Adrian. It's just a quick question for Irene. I've been to the course for the by the BZN, the bystander course, and it was a lot. There were a lot of focus on what the Asian community is living in the US. So my first thing is, do you have a suggestion to bring more UK perspective as well, because it's really US focused, and also by learning from that course, what happened in the US is so worse. It's really physical aggressions. So my question to you is, do you think that do you living with the anxiety that this kind of level of aggressivity and attacks can also come in the UK? Is it in the back of your mind sometimes? Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Well, can I ask when you did the course?
I think last year or 2 years ago.
Oh, really?
The first time I received the link, yeah.
Okay, so that's quite recent actually, because I think the one I did was either last year or the year before, and in person, and I found it very useful, and I found it supportive. I felt like I was seen. I mean, it's the two people that run the workshop are very good, and I felt like I came away with tools. So was it run by BC? By the British Asian and Southeast Asian group?
Yes, but it was on. I attended remotely, not in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they use a lot American references. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and they have a group of vigilance to protect each other and stuff like that. So
okay, yes, they did touch upon that. Yes, no, I do remember that. So yes, you're right. They did give an American example. It was a while back. I didn't remember the details. My overall feeling was I came away feeling empowered and a bit more equipped. So I still recommend it, and obviously just sift it, in terms of, American, UK, US. In terms of over here, I mean, having experienced, on the receiving end of physical abuse, it doesn't really, it's already here. I mean, most of the racism that happens in my community doesn't get reported because, especially in terms of previous generations, there's a mistrust of the police because people aren't taken seriously, and the attitude has been because, I can't understand them, don't speak proper English, just didn't take away, not taken seriously. So therefore, they don't bother to report it. It doesn't mean that the crimes aren't still taking place up and down the country, and takeaways in particular really get it in the neck. I mean, I don't come from a catering background. My father, was a civil servant, but he hit a glass ceiling there. He was treated like rubbish, I'll put it politely. I mean, he was, and he suffered a lifetime of depression from it, really, when I look back now. And he's, so, and you only have to look at COVID. I mean, interestingly, the cases that hit the national news, the ones that I remember, they were really aggressive, but they did focus on, so as one case was a Singapore student on Oxford Street, and he was beaten up. I mean, really severely, and the photos of his, his beaten up face, and then months later when they came to him, he still had the scars, but he was, a Singapore student. So, and then the other one was, I think it was Plymouth at the university, so he's a lecturer, so he's also stationed there, but not native to here. And he had also been I can't remember, I think he had been beaten up as well, but it was ongoing, kind of verbal. I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm kind of not, like, I'm not surprised. So, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, I was a little bit, I was concerned during COVID because I thought, anybody who's been harboring anything, you know, this is giving them license to really go all out. And I did, you know, I kept in touch with friends and colleagues, like, are you okay? Are you okay? And quite a lot of us, not myself, thankfully, I mean, because I was and my parents and verbs, but quite a number of my friends experienced some really horrible things, you know, physical.
Mm.
I mean, it was a whole lot, the verbal just continued as it does, but or it just got ramped up. It was like Brexit gave people a license to be racist anyway, and then COVID gave people a license to be racist towards Chinese and East Asians. Yeah, it became acceptable because it was our fault.
I need to bring things to an official close, turn the recording off if that's okay, but do stay on after we've just talked a little bit about Next Time and Beyond, and we turn the recording off. So further dates, one final date booked for 2024, the 16th of October, where we'll have our second in our series of decolonisation. We'll be looking at decolonising the curriculum. Unfortunately, the Black curriculum have been unable to supply anyone to speak to us on that occasion. So Robert Taylor, one of our members, is going to draw together a number of resources and also talk about his work within schools. So that looks like it's going to be a really good session with Robert leading us on that topic. So that's our final one. We'll then be revamping the program for 2025. And so do put ideas of things that you feel you would like us to cover to any of the steering group members or to me. And we'll be very happy to consider those for next time. We've got a couple of ideas already, and even just one that's come to my mind this evening is something about epigenetics and how trauma is inherited potentially in our genome, or in the cells of our body, even not just the memories, but that's something physical is retained there. So that's for me a subject that's worth exploring, I think. All meetings as ever are on Zoom, 8 to 9:30 p.m. So yes, another reminder of the growing resources here on our Padlet board on the website. And I've left that up, that if you're kind of felt triggered by tonight's content, do reach out for support. We had that up last time, but do look after yourselves and seek support from others if anything has been triggered for you through this evening.